This is the second webinar in the series that we have on the LOESS project. This is a piece of work where we're working with students to develop content for students by students. And we're particularly thinking about the kinds of competencies you need to develop in terms of soil health and soil literacy and education. And we're very lucky to be joined by an expert panel today. Callum, who you've already met, is going to be on the panel with us. I think you probably do the third slot. We also have Roy Nielsen and we have Christine Irvine. And we'll start with Roy. So Roy Nielsen, Dr. Roy Nielsen is a soil ecologist at the James Hutton Institute, which is like the top institute, I guess, in the UK, where he leads plant soil interactions research group within the ecological science department, and he's the Hutton lead for the Centre for Agricultural Sustainable Innovation. But he's also very well known for his work in citizen science, and is currently the Scotland lead on another sister European project called Eco Soils, which is aiming to engage citizens in protecting and restoring soils by building their skills and enhancing their knowledge. And they're particularly working with local people across Scotland to encourage them to collect samples from their own area, which then they are then taking and analysing. So it's very much kind of working with people and encouraging them in their own soil literacy. So it's kind of doing something similar to what we're doing in this project, but bringing in a different set of values and a different way of doing things. So Roy, could I hand over to you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emma. And I'll say good afternoon, even though it's pitch black here, but good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. As Emma said, I've been working in the area of citizen science now for close to 30 years, at a time where my hair was red rather than white. But and I'd like to sort of convey, I think I've got 10 minutes, convey the potential, or I would argue the benefits of incorporating citizen science into research projects, which might seem an unusual concept, or at least one that is maybe more viewed in keeping with monitoring, say, butterflies or birds or whatever. But within the European Union, there's a real push, real interest in engaging all citizens at every level to become involved in research. And to do that, and for that reason, it's really to make sure that everyone is invested, for example, in the environment, better understands their environment, and then therefore then takes care of our environment. And I would sort of indicate, or advocate is maybe a better word, for areas where citizens or citizen science can really benefit from the participation of the public. One of which is long-term projects. So, for example, a typical research project is funded anything between 12 months to 5 years, if you're lucky. But citizens can sample or participate in projects long after a project is ended. And there's good examples in the UK, and I can give you, and one of which is monitoring an invasive species called the New Zealand flatworm. That resides in soils and preys on earthworms. That project was funded in the 1980s, the late 1980s. Project funding stopped, I think, in about 89. Yet to this day, in 2024, members of the public, citizen scientists are there, as they're now called, still to this day record and monitor this invasive species. And if you look at the National Biodiversity Network website in the UK, records are updated regularly by members of the public. So here's an example of how citizen science can enrich and benefit a project by taking it way over the actual funded period. Another example, and this is where ECHO comes in, the project that is a sister project to LOESS, is that in the European Union there are some data sets on soils, primarily agricultural soils, some forest. And the reason that there's a focus on agricultural and forest soils, that's where the production, food and fiber production is. But as we all know, there are soils everywhere, whether it be urban, brownfield, greenfield, peatland. And these are rarely sampled. So one opportunity is to have citizen science or citizen scientists help expand those data sets by taking samples over these different land use types that typically are ignored in research projects that are focused on, I say, agriculture and forestry. And that's exactly what we're doing with ECHO, in that we've undertaken to sample 16,500 soil samples from across all EU member states and Scotland over a period of the project, which is, we've got 4 years left of the project. And we could not do that at that scale as researchers. It's just not physically possible, and it's not possible from an economic viewpoint. So citizen scientists are, without doubt, a real benefit to that scenario. And 2 more areas before I think my 10 minutes is close to being up. One is involving citizen scientists in public engagement. So you might have a champion or, say, an ambassador who is very passionate about soils, for example. And again, this is the route that we're taking in ECHO, where those individuals corral sort of members of communities, community members, members of clubs, allotment societies, and basically democratize science. So instead of taking science away, instead of retaining science in the sort of the boundaries of academia, it allows science to be democratized and spread amongst society in a more fair and just manner, and allows more people to engage in science. And as I said right at the beginning, that engagement leads to learning. That engagement in learning leads to understanding and knowledge, which then hopefully then will be deployed in helping maintain and enhance our environment. And then in the very final aspect of citizen science, which is hugely important, is, and it links to this democracy of science, so to speak, is that the data should be open, free, and available to everyone. So again, it's not a case of scientists having data that they sort of keep to themselves and publish in elite journals. It is the fact that the data is available in public repositories, and maybe the only constraint and limit is having an internet connection. But it's to make sure that that data is used appropriately, safeguarded, and the data is valued. I think that's a key point, that the citizens who participate in these projects recognize that their work is valued and their data means something. And by having it open and shareable, it means that anyone, whether it be a researcher, a policymaker, a member of the public, can view that data and see the data openly. So this is, for example, in ECHO again, thinking of what we're intending doing is we're going to have a data repository called ECHO Repo, which is going to link to EU databases and will enable all the citizen scientists through a QR code to follow the data from the point of sampling through the laboratory to data analysis and then seeing the results online, and then they will be able to compare their results to say the neighbouring town or the neighbouring region or the neighbouring forest or the neighbouring brownfield site, whatever it may be that they've sampled. They can do whatever comparison that they want that's important to them. And it's not a data analysis that a scientist or an academic would like to do. It's what's actually important to the scientist. So I think I'd like to think in those sort of brief 10 minutes, I've given you an insight into the value and the benefit of engaging citizens and their huge and positive contribution to science generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. I think that was really a kind of a very good kind of introduction to citizen science. I'm just wondering, were any of you aware of citizen science before this? One person is saying yes, they were aware of citizen science. So yeah, that's kind of it's interesting because you feel like it's something that is more broadly known, but actually it maybe isn't as well known as you would think. If you're okay, we're going to maybe save questions and kind of do the panel and then save questions for the end. And I think, Christine, we were in touch just while you were speaking there, hopefully. Christine, maybe...
Can you hear me?
We can.
You're not going to be able to see me, unfortunately. That's not working. But having run wildly up and down the corridors, I'm now in possession of a working mic. So...
Fantastic. Well done. Well done. But we are delighted to welcome you anyway, Christine, even if unfortunately we can't see you.
Yes.
And just as a quick introduction, Christine Irvine is a full-time lecturer in applied and environmental sciences at Southwest College. She has a focus on environmental sustainability, waste management, science for environmental technicians, and on environmental management. She's based mainly at the Enniskillen campus, but also works across Indoma and probably beyond as well, Christine, I'm sure.
Well, no, just the two for now.
Just the two. It's quite a distance. It's plenty, I'm sure. She led on the Connected programme, which aimed to link the further and higher education sectors in Northern Ireland to business and the community at large, which I did not know had ended until you said, actually, Christine. And was also involved in the Northern Ireland Peripheries project. But more than that, she's also really a passionate soil advocate and is working with a range of students across different disciplines in the college to try and encourage them to think differently about soil health. So, Christine, we'll hand over to you now, if that's okay.
Okay, no problem. Just on what Roy was saying there, that I was joined the Riverfly Association's Citizen Science Project, and that was a really good one, where they were using like ramblers and people who are involved in, you know, just walking along the riverway or fishermen or whatever to do kick sampling to, you know, to find out more about rivers, and it was a really good project. Yeah, so my disciplines have moved on a little bit in recent years because the college no longer runs our foundation and bachelor degree in environmental management. Environmental science was removed from, so I'm now teaching basic applied science, some genetics, health and safety, communication, investigations, lab skills. And in the last couple of years, I've also taken over the level 3 agriculture, which we've just introduced. So as my life now mostly consists of trying to shoehorn soil science into various different disciplines. I was also part of the team that developed the initial project-based learning model in the college. We run on the EPIC model: explore, plan, implement, consider. Most colleges now have some kind of project-based learning. And when we were developing that, what I found most interesting was the potential for collaborative learning and talking to other departments. And apart from noticing the huge difference in the, you know, the obvious curriculum differences, but the remarkable similarities in the way students identified, explored, planned solutions for problems. So that cross-disciplinary idea took hold on me through that. And also about a few years ago, I was tasked with developing sustainability curriculum that could be used as an additional topic all across different curriculum areas. And that brought me back to that core idea of sustainability, not just as a way to improve life on Earth, but as a tool to link citizens with science. Because we're looking at food production and soil depletion. The environmental impacts are obvious, but then, identifying the social and economic aspects, and that sort of not as closely linked and not as easy to find, really. So, and I think whenever we did our first cross-disciplinary project, I'll tell you some of the, the things that we did wrong, as it were, because working in science or working with degree students, you run the risk of thinking that your students are in fact, there's no other way of saying that your students are smarter than the vocational students, than the catering students, the plumbers, the electricians, or whatever, but actually in sort of very independent, self-motivated professional learners, then I found, that the catering students, I was blown away by them. And when I was speaking to the lecturers, they were very enthusiastic about getting their students know about how the food they cook is grown and about the microbiota that sustain that growth. So I thought we'd have a little project, and I linked them up with my microbiology students. And the project was just in some ways a success, but there are a few things I learned about chefs if you're doing a soil project with them. They work, oh God, no. Sorry, on a call. They're working 15-hour days while eating their own meals hunched over a bin, so if you're taking up your time, you need to be doing so efficiently. Oh, they do genuinely care about fresh, healthy food. They're not that happy about getting their hands dirty, providing gloves with soil testing, and words could not possibly express how much they're not interested in the cation exchange capacity of soil. So I was learning about levels of science to use with other disciplines. So if I wanted the project to have significant value for my students and the catering students, I realized that I was going to have to build in some kind of contextualized links to the real world outside the college. So we started work on the project together, a new project, identifying the purpose of the problem. Are we creating something new? Are we solving a specific problem? And we worked out the purpose itself doesn't matter so much as the fact that you need to have a purpose, because otherwise interest in the project will wane and it will fail. We needed to learn how to identify realistic goals, how to identify the resources and skills we would need, to map the resources and skills we already have, to spot the gaps and work out what we need to plug those gaps, and then how we're going to do that. So when we were identifying the purpose of our soil education project, we were looking at the big problems: climate change, soils as carbon sinks, soil depletion, chemical microplastic buildups, novel entities section of the 9 planetary boundaries, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then we also looked at small problems. Access to fresh fruit and vegetables is not always equitable. Lower income families don't have access to that. Everything is expensive. We thought about how food miles matter, not only in terms of carbon footprinting, but in terms of supporting local businesses. We thought about the people who do produce our food and how difficult farming is as a living, and the pressure on farmers to produce intensively, and that outweighs the need to preserve the soils. So, and the most surprising thing that I found when we were talking to different disciplines in the college was that very few people seem to actually know what soil is. It was just dirt. So for my own students, when they were trying to build this soil education project, the big thing that we found with them is that they wanted to change the world in one big bite, and how could learning about soil help with climate change? So, so we had to discipline ourselves to doing what we knew we could manage, and we knew that, knowledge is like a pixelated image. If you've only got a few pixels, the big picture is impossible to see, but every pixel helps us to make the picture clearer. So small gains in knowledge add to the image. So thinking about the problems we want to solve, and we're trying to shorten the list, so to identify some of the needs on our program checklist. So when we're boiling our ideas together, we realized that concentrating on educating people on the basics of what soil is would go a long way towards educating people in some of the other problems. And then thinking about the stakeholders that we identified in the list of problems, we realized we could begin to address some of our needs in terms of resource and skills gaps. I mean, one of our major problems is we only have one polytunnel. It does have real soil in it, but it's just even having access to other soils for testing. You know, we didn't have any budget on this, literally no budget. I had some students and one polytunnel at that stage. But then we realized that I started teaching level 3 course in agriculture, and the links I developed give me access to forward-thinking farmers with a good knowledge of soil and a lot of soil that they would allow us to play around with. And they had a keen interest in educating their community about homegrown produce. So, and then the catering lectures also had links to restaurateurs who were keen to share their expertise on fresh produce and preparing it for the table. So that allowed us to build our purpose. So the farmers and restaurateurs wanted to engage with the local communities, and we could be the facilitators in that. So the final project idea that we have is Soil is for Life. There were some other very strange names, but that's the one that we settled on in the end. And the purpose of the project is educating the public on the importance of soil as an underpinning support system for life on Earth. And the deliverables that we are coming up with are guides to basic soil biology, both online and in person. And I have found that that has been invaluable in getting my students to truly understand soil is by taking them back through the biology to lower and lower levels until they find something which they could explain to any man on the street what soil is and, you know, why you need to know that. And developing their own methods based on texture testing, settlement tests, the kind of some ways that the public could engage with the soil that they have to grow things in, without needing a lab, without any specialist equipments, and then getting them to understand the effects of the soil type on things like water retention and nutrient uptake for the plants. And we also wanted to do some work on getting the public to understand what soil microbes are, how important they are, and how we can care for them, and hoping we can feed back into farming groups with that as well. Mapping soil health to plant health and the consequences of poor soil health, and then also guides to simple food to grow from scratch and recipes to use the food that you have grown in your soil. And that was the idea of the catering department. And obviously there's a potential to involve other community stakeholders, local schools, primary schools. I mean, I don't know if any of you have or know any primary school age children, but you do see a lot of primary schools with, the little primary school garden, and it's often abandoned and unkept because unless there's a teacher with a particularly keen interest, it's difficult to keep that sort of thing going. But those are resources which are sitting there that we can potentially link up with. And in speaking to other disciplines that we're speaking to involve them in this project, health and social care students suggested that they would like to be involved because they were thinking of people in care homes, elderly people, all those years of gardening experience sitting there untapped. So it was another way we could get into another disciplinary area, and then potentially other community and mental health groups. So our version, as it were, is not so much citizen science as sort of community science, where we're delivering the base level of science and with the ability for people to expand on that if they want. The biggest pitfall we have versus a citizen science project like ECHO or like the Riverfly project, we have student groups in the project, so the links must be maintained between the project actions and the educational learning outcomes over diverse curriculum areas. Our students already have a large program of work to get through, so we need to map it directly into their needs as well. The project then is taking time to build, and long-term thinking is not really compatible with semesterized course modules. So the project that the students are working on must be flexible enough to pass on to the next student group in order so that it doesn't become a small closed-end project, which is just one group of students who are working on. It must have the ability to be expanded upon and run with the next group, if you know what I mean. So the outcomes that we're expecting, I've been running over time. What do we get? We get a broad education for our students. They've got their knowledge acquisition, but they're also developing their soft and transferable skills. The public get access to information, hands-on spaces. The industrial stakeholders get a voice and a space to share their experience, to encourage community engagement with local produce, etc. And then for the more high-minded of our students, the planet gets educated individuals with better understanding of the importance of preserving the soil resource. And that is where we are at the minute. So
that is amazing, Christine. That's all I'll say. That's amazing. And actually, I'm going to come back to you because we do have a series of case studies on the LOESS website, and I think that would be a lovely case study because it's the first time you've talked about it in such depth. You know, when I've been around, I just think it would be a very, very nice case study. So I will come back to you on that. The guys, I could see, were taking furious notes there as well, but we will make the recording available afterwards too, if you know, if you want to kind of go back through some of that. So we will move on quickly to our third speaker so that we have just a little bit of time. I know, Christine, you need to be away quite tight as well. We have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So of course you all know Callum, Dr. Callum McGowan, who is a researcher, a writer and an activist who's focused on climate justice. His research is interdisciplinary and explores critical perspectives on and approaches to the planetary crisis. His approach is centred on social justice, democratisation and citizenship, and he's currently focused on the role of universities in the climate crisis and the transformations they need to undergo. And he's leading on the Climate Justice Universities Union across the island of Ireland, and he's just about to take up a policy role with Oxfam Ireland as well. So, hand over to you.
Yeah. Okay.
If you want to pin the right, should have done that for you there. I think you might have you shared from inside Teams, otherwise it might not.
Yeah. Okay.
At the top, there's a presenting Teams there.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. You keep fixing our tech problems. Very good.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah, okay.
I think it's spectator. If you're hovering over it at the bottom left, I think it's that spectator view. Who's speaking?
Well, we'll go with this. Let's take the time. Yeah, so I will try and be brief to make sure there is as much time for questions with Roy and Christine as possible, because obviously I'll be here plenty of time for questions. And this is really me taking my perspective from research that I've done, which is around politics, the economy, and the planetary crisis generally, and applying it to some of the questions you're asking about soil and soil-based education as well. In some respects, this is quite different from what Roy and Christine have talked about, but there are common themes there as well. I think Roy talked about citizen science as democratizing process, and Christine talked about this interlinking aspect of soil as a sort of base concern and a way to link different issues together. Now, I'm not sure how well you can see this. This was actually sent to myself and Emma by Grant, who spoke on Monday. And these are, for those of you who don't know, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in the middle of this image, you see soil. It's just a sort of visual representation of how it is actually connected to each one of these things. So be that good education, peace, strong institutions, climate action, and so on. Soil plays a role, or healthy soil plays a role in each one of those. So then why is that important from a social justice perspective? So for me, I take a really holistic and encompassing view of what sustainability means. I think this has come up in some of our discussions on Monday as well, and was kind of talked about by Roy and Christina as well. So soil, if it plays a role in carbon sequestration, so assisting with our efforts to decarbonize and tackling the climate crisis, biodiversity, so protecting non-human species, protecting our local and global ecosystems, those ecosystems that we all rely on, that sustain our planetary system. For things like flood prevention, so needing good, healthy soil that doesn't have lots of water runoff, as we've seen here in Belfast for the last couple of weeks, just how much that concentrated rainfall and not having adequate flood defences can affect us socially. For food production, so obviously we need healthy soils, enable to feed ourselves, to feed a growing global population. Our cultural heritage, this has come up in some discussions as well, in terms of our place-based knowledge. The generations before us have lived lives in ways where we're much more deeply connected with the land that sustained them, and had stories around that land, and had a very deep connection to it. And also preventing conflict. So soil is a precious resource. It's a productive resource that does feed us, but it's a finite resource, right? Healthy soil anyway. So, if that resource is allowed to degrade and become arid in some cases and not be able to support populations, then what will those populations do in order to be able to feed themselves? So each of these is a social justice issue for me. It's its own problem. It's an ecological problem, might be a political problem, but it's a social justice problem. If we want a stable climate, then there's issues of climate justice there, who feels the consequences of climate. So we need to act on that. That means having healthy soil to act on that. Biodiversity is a justice issue. Flood prevention, food production, all the rest. These are social justice issues. If we don't address these things with a social justice lens, then there is the possibility that we perpetuate social injustices or create new injustices along the way. So then, just as a couple of examples, and hopefully you can read this, it is quite small. It actually came into my inbox today. And I was talking about the need for healthy soils for tackling climate. And this is the picture of the sort of arid soil that we have as global temperatures increase, and we have droughts in some regions. This isn't likely to, you're not likely to be able to grow much in those soils. Also speaks about our sort of economic system and our agricultural systems, which have incentivized different ways of working with the land. So here it says, well, the purpose of the article, it doesn't say it there, is talking about farming is really now oriented around oil rather than soil. So using different oil-based products to try and intensify food production and so on. So looking to synthetic based ways to grow our food rather than the natural. So disintegrating that connection with soil and having healthy soil for the purpose of them. Some's also quite topical in terms of escalating conflict around the world. So reports around the extent to which soil and other natural resources in Gaza have been degraded, probably completely undermined in some cases due to the amount of munitions that have been dropped on that area. It's not just here, it's in conflict all around the world, historical conflicts as well. The use of chemical agents, for instance, in Vietnam during the US-Vietnam War, almost like permanently, really. They're still living with the effects of the toxins within that soil, within that land. And then a final one, ownership. So who actually owns our land? These are big questions we need to ask, because with ownership comes certain entitlements. What action do you or do you not take in terms of protecting soils, in terms of how we connect to them, in what ways? This graph is taken from, excuse me, recent research that was done, a book actually by this guy Shrubsole, and this is looking at ownership of land in England, and the vast majority of which is in private ownership. That really matters, because then it is the owner who ultimately has responsibility for the soil, but also has the ability to act or not act in certain ways. So just to sum this up, sustainability and, for me, soil health, therefore requires looking at all aspects of how we live, how we work, how we produce, and how we consume. So we're taking a holistic view of sustainability and centering soil within that, and recognizing the integral part that it plays in our planetary system, in our social system, our economic system. We really need to be asking big questions around, is the kind of society, the kind of economy we live with, fit for actually tackling these big issues? And if it isn't, then what are the kind of skills and what are the kind of learnings that we need to have in place to actually tackle those challenges? Some that I think are important and have come up already, particularly this problem-focused learning. I think that was strong what Christine talked about. But yeah, identifying the big challenges and then learning in particular ways to face those challenges. What are the problems that we actually face? So an action-focused learning. Critical thinking, generally. Systems thinking, so thinking in those holistic ways, how different things are connected to each other, rather than just having narrow disciplinary focus. And the interdisciplinary education obviously being a big part of that. And then importantly for me, theories of social change. So we have these big challenges, these big issues, but how do we actually tackle them? What is the kind of social change that we have to have for sustainability and for justice? Some of these ideas will be quite controversial to people within higher education, that higher education shouldn't be sort of action focused in that way. But I think that given the scale of the challenges that we face in terms of climate, in terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of the conflict we're seeing around the world and so on, that's exactly what we need. So I will leave it.
Yep, that's on time. Well done. Thank you. So, you've had three quite diverse, different ways of thinking about this, from the very kind of hands-on practical things of what you do to the kind of bigger, how do you change the world, to the how do you engage with citizens and how do you work through education in a different context, in a much more applied context. And I'm just wondering, is there anything anyone is thinking about, wants to ask some of the panel? We have just about 10 minutes now. I think people are doing a lot of deep thinking here.
Well, whilst everyone's actually thinking deep, if you don't mind, I could make a comment that the points that Callum raises are, as he says, place-based, but we're place-based globally, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And to give you an example, I mean, this time last week, I was in Sweden, attending a conference, and I was giving a presentation, and there was two things came out of it. One was in terms of urban soils, who's the owner, and you know, Callum showed very clearly at a national scale in England. But if you want the greatest societal impact in soils, you need to deal with urban soils. But one of the huge barriers is ownership, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world. That's a huge problem. And again, just to reiterate the point about conflict, as Callum mentioned, Gaza. I mean, we've recently just submitted a project for review that has colleagues in Ukraine, and they're in Kharkiv and Kyiv, and it's about remediating their soils for exactly the same reason as Callum mentioned. So it's very place-based, but place-based is global, and yeah, it's something to consider. So hopefully that's allowed time for people to ask some questions or think of some questions.
I think it is quickly, it's really important, the Ukraine example as well, because it kind of shows in ways the fragility of the system, the food production system that we have, and its vulnerability, because Ukraine is one of the big bread baskets of Europe. So a lot of our food and our food production does rely very heavily on the ability to produce that food in the first place.
Yeah, I wonder, can I just add as well? I really enjoyed that, Callum. Another thing that I'm very interested in is, you know, looking back, even way back into history at what happened to agriculture, and it was something you said about something about ownership of spaces, was it, and the cultural significance of soil, when you look at how their traditional farming methods were destroyed with colonialization and the effects that had, you know, and then the ongoing effect in climate change as well. Then, you know, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, so I guess that's almost about the history of Ireland and Scotland as well, I'm guessing, Roy, in terms of how land was owned and how land was trying to think of the right way to put it, how land was colonized, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, just colonization.
Yeah. And I guess throughout other countries as well, that's been happening too.
If I may, actually, Roy, one of your or you're obviously talking a lot about citizen science. I'm wondering, have you considered ways in which a citizen science approach could be integrated into education and training for students in ways that would, I don't know, enable its sort of proliferation, its expansion? Are there particular sort of skills or values that you think are important to incorporate into education to enable that?
That's a really interesting question, actually. And yeah, I mean, there's so many skills that could be gained by having a citizen science component within a module. Not only the classical science-based skills, but huge amount of social skills, planning skills. So you could argue it's one of your ultimate interdisciplinary opportunities.
Absolutely.
And yeah, you do wonder why that's not being considered. I actually, that's a fantastic question. And again, thinking of the subject area you mentioned, you know, social justice, and that could easily bring that to the fore. That could actually be the coalescing of everything. And you wonder why that's not being considered.
I think it has kind of.
Has it?
Oh,
Okay.
well, I'm thinking of.
I think
sorry, go on ahead, Christine.
educational change moves very slowly, in my experience, you know. even, you know, all the colleges shouting about project-based learning, but actually getting them to incorporate that into, right, okay, we're going to want you to do project-based learning, but then we want you to do this old traditional way of assessment, you know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the assessment is often the stumbling block, actually, but I have
Yeah,
seen it
yeah.
done, I know, but at school level, actually, interesting secondary school. I've seen teams of, you know, when I say children, young people in school uniform out doing traffic counts. And I know that they were also doing erosion monitoring, I think, in the morns. It was some particularly enthusiastic geography teacher who I think was taking their class group out year after year to monitor, and then each student group was building on what the last one did, because it was the same teacher. Exactly to your point, Christine, about you need the infrastructure there in between the student groups to kind of keep it all together. So I have seen versions of it done, but I don't know so much at university level. I'm wondering if any of you guys been involved in anything like that? You've been sent out to.
Not like a continuous one, but for geography A level, we had to do coursework. And in that we had, like, for the 2 years, we did 3 practice ones. So one of them was like sand dune erosion and like beach littering. One of them was like more of an urban scape, and then one of them was like beach profiling, and then you got tasked to do your own, but it wasn't like a continuous year by year project.
Yeah. So one of the students has had, I don't know if you could hear there, could you?
Yeah.
So has had some experience, but again at school level, not at university. There's nothing in sustainable development where you do that, no. Because it feels like you do more of the kind of being outside the university probably than a lot of programs.
So we're doing that with the science shop, like the year long, but that can be in any sort of element, and then it's only for the year and then it closes. So and keep going.
Yeah.
But as the students were just saying, that those were individual projects. They were not a sort of an integrated project that had a multi-year component. And since we're not getting any questions, maybe I can turn the table and ask the students, would that be something that they would be interested in?
Yeah. I think there is enthusiasm, all right. Yeah. There
Cool.
you go, Roy. That's your next project now. Your next proposal.
Because looking at it from my point of view, from a much lower level, from underneath university, you know, that's, you know, not being a brain on a stick, if you know what I mean, being actually to able to actively link with the real world, you know, is very important, you know, rather than, you know, being purely theoretical.
Yeah, and that's often the bit that's most challenging, I think, and certainly as someone whose day job is exactly that piece of work, you're still constantly, actually, the thing that I find is that students are there already. It's the university itself that you sort of have to you know, and people are worried, like, what are the learning outcomes? What are the competences, which is exactly what we're thinking about here. You know, what are the things, how can we demonstrate that students have learned something, that it has made a difference to them? And I think that's where it's incumbent on all of us to try and start developing the evidence base and start developing the roots, so that then you know, you'll never get the lecturers who don't want to do it, but the ones who do want to do it, you're leaving an infrastructure and a kind of a set of principles there that they can work forward from, which is exactly hopefully what these guys are going to be working on now. So thank you both very much, and thank you, Callum, as well, for joining us. We are going to be working on with the students now for another 90 minutes or so for them to start thinking about what you've been saying. Obviously, you're both on the community of practice, so we'll be coming back to you anyway with where we get to with this. And this has been recorded too, and it will be made available in some way through the project. We're still kind of negotiating some of that. Roy, you'll know how these discussions go. So thank you both very much, and I don't think it's too soon to say have a good holiday season. And we will be in touch with you in the new year.
We're on the box of sweets in the classroom stage, so that's always Christmas, isn't it?
The wheeling the TV into the classroom stage.
Yes. Okay, I have to go and become the ghost of Christmas past now, so I shall leave. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Roy.
Thanks everyone. Have a nice Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye.